Good morning. Good morning, and welcome back to the Lounge of You Go Girl. I am Lydia, your host, and I'm back today with another podcast. Good morning. I hope everybody is well. And today I am going to start a two-part series on this particular topic. It's a very sensitive topic. I actually did a video, I guess some 2, maybe 3 years ago on my YouTube channel in regards to part of this topic. And today we're going to be talking about soul ties and trauma bonding, the dangers of that. And we won't complete it today. It's going to be a two-part series, as I stated. Today we're going to start with soul ties, connections, and how it can happen, because we do know that it can happen in multiple ways. It could be a spiritual connection. It also could be through sexual orientation. And oftentimes, many women are, I think more so, get bonded to someone through sexual connections. And we're going to talk about the dangers of that, because I see a lot of women falling prey to relationships that are unhealthy. And then we sit around on the outside looking at it and we wonder what happens and why they can't seem to break the connection. And it's a lot deeper than what we think. And the Bible even speaks about soul ties. And it's something that I guess is one of those subjects that people, don't necessarily like talking about, because it can, let's see what I'm trying to say. It can evoke a division, I think, where people often fall apart or disagree on things, but it's a true thing, and it's something that you need to be aware of, and especially as a younger woman. Hopefully some younger women will stumble through this podcast, and heads up for that and listen. It is known to happen quite often. And then when you see someone that's in a relationship and you wonder why they won't leave that person, and sometimes it could be the most toxic relationship, and that's because of that soul ties that's been formed, and they're suffering from that trauma bonding and connection. I got an opportunity to listen to a podcast, or actually watch the podcast. It's on YouTube, and the gentleman name of his channel is Dear Future Wifey, I think that's the name of it. And he did a two-part series with Danae Jackson. And everybody knows the relationship coach by the name of Derek Jackson. He is a motivational coach. He has millions of followers on Instagram and YouTube. And he was this attractive coach who talks to women about relationships, giving them all types of advice on how to get out of these relationships and what men do. And hey, I always say, the apple don't fall far from the tree. That was a saying that old people used to have when I was growing up. And in his case, it was true. He was all of the things that he talked about. And not saying that some of us are not, and you can definitely use your experience in your past to help someone to get away from things. But if you're still struggling with that yourself and you're still doing these things, it's a little bit hypocritical. And so so the guy on Dear Future Wife, he had his wife, Danae Jackson, on his podcast. She did a two-part series, and she talked about how their relationship started and how it's now ending in divorce. They're currently in divorce. And I'm going to say allegedly on all of this, but it's out there. It's out there if you want to watch the podcast. Both of those podcasts have gotten over 1 million views just from people looking at it. But her story is very powerful. And I gained a respect for the young lady because she went through some stuff. And it talked about how she was aware of a lot of things that was happening to her, but she was so trauma bonded through that soul tie that she had with him that she found it hard to be able to break it. And that often happens. So women, when we get, involved in these relationships, and that's why it's important that when you involve yourself in a relationship, we often jump into sexual activity in a relationship so soon. And it's so prevalent now, I think more so than ever, because people don't look at sex in the way that I feel that God created that act. And it's used for just pleasure and not realizing the connection that forms through that activity. And it's often very hard once that connection happens, because when two people come together sexually and in that act, there's something called oxytocin that is released. And it's a hormone that plays a significant part in establishing a strong emotional bond between sexual partners. And you have to be very careful with that. That's why your body, women, is a temple, and that's not to be shared with everybody. And we do know that people are out here going in and out of relationships, and sex is often a part of each and every one. And I feel that that is something that is special, and it should be shared with somebody that is special. There is such a connection that happens through sexual contact. And your body is a divine essence. And you should be very mindful of what you establish when you are connected through sex. A lot of us are not taught growing up. I know, and when I was growing up, my mother always just said, no sex. She didn't sit down with us and talk to us and tell us anything in regards to, the connection that could form. Only thing I knew was that it was taboo, and that it wasn't to be done unless we were married. And it's unfortunate that as little girls, we don't learn, the different things that happens to us from a physical, emotional, spiritual standpoint once we have sex with a man. And sometimes women go into relationships and they're already damaged, and that also can cause them to have this, emptiness inside where they don't feel. And oftentimes they continue to have, these different relationships with men after men after men. Through that physical contact, the body sends these signals to our nerves in our brain, and it releases those chemicals. And through that pleasure and orgasms, it can create that bond that can be so hard to tear apart. And oftentimes it takes a long time for women in particular to break that bond from a man once it happens. And anything spiritual that happens, you're transferring that between the two of you. So if you have somebody in your life that has deep trauma or darkness, evil within them, when you create that sexual bond and that tie, you transfer those spiritual connections. Did you all know that? And oftentimes once that happens, and that's within you, it's hard for you to get away from it. It's a darkness that can't be explained. That's why it's so important that when you decide to have a sexual partner, that is somebody that has a connection with you from a spiritual level, so that when you're transferring that spiritual connection, that it is positive and it's beautiful. And it is long lasting, and you guys should have that connection that's beautiful and great for the both of you. And For women, it's just on another level. And I'm not saying that men don't have the same thing, because oftentimes you see men that are very possessive and obsessed with women, and sometimes that could be created through that connection, through that soul tie that's happening through sex. So you have to be very careful. And oftentimes once that relationship is broken, it's hard. It's very hard for people to walk away, because it takes a while to get rid of that. So I wanted to bring up this topic, introduce it to you guys here in this first podcast, and to be mindful of the relationships that you have. And that's why I feel, and this is my opinion, and it's also through the Bible, that, that's why it was established that God wanted that connection of sex to be through marriage, because of these things that can happen. And it was supposed to create that bond so you can be one. And when we use our bodies and go from relationship to relationship to relationship, and we have sex, you're bringing all of these spirits into you. And we have to be very careful of that. So in the next podcast, we're going to talk about how that connection can create that soul tie and the trauma bonding when it's a negative relationship. And I want us to be healthy, mind, body, and spirit women. And as we get older, as older women, and we've gone down through some things, we definitely don't want to be getting ourselves connected with someone through this soul tie at this late stage of life, because it's very hard to separate from soul ties, and it can be very damaging to you emotionally, physically, and spiritually in your life. So we have to be very careful of that. So I want to thank you all for tuning in today to You Go Girl with your girl Lydia. I am the host of this channel. We're here to promote wellness of the mind, body, and spirit. So join me here next Sunday for the part 2 of this topic. And I hope that it will help you to be better as a woman, be whole as a woman. And I want to thank you for tuning in. And I'll see you next week here in the lounge. Take care.